The second half of the concert begins with one of the most famous excerpts from an opera by Bizet from 1863, The Pearl Fishers, Les Pêcheurs de Perles, which actually marked the inaugural performance of concert opera in 1987. Now, at the time that we decided to open our doors with that particular piece, a tenor named Jerry Hadley, whom we lost far too soon in 2009, I think it was wildly popular with Washington audiences. From the time of his debut with Washington National Opera in 1980 in The Barber of Seville, he went on to a string of successes here, and some of us made friends with him. So when he was appearing with the National Symphony in the title role of Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex, Stephen and I had lunch with him. We told him about our plans for concert opera. We knew that he had had a success singing The Pearl Fishers with New York City Opera. Bless his heart, Jerry said, absolutely, I will do it. Be in touch with my manager, Ken Benson, which we did. Jerry, the 85-86 season at Washington National Opera, had sung in Eugene Onegin with the Korean soprano Hae Kyung-hong, who had also just been embraced by Washington audiences. So we asked her to sing in the inaugural performances of Pearl Fishers with Jerry, which she agreed to do. And to further stack the decks, we also hired a baritone who was the proverbial local kid made good, a baritone who just appeared last season with Washington National Opera in Wagner's Ring, Gordon Hawkins, who in 1986 at the local level and in New York was a grand prize winner of the Met National Council auditions. So off we went. Now, The Pearl Fishers has a terrible book. It makes absolutely no sense and is kind of a textbook case of why it is sometimes better to do an opera in concert form. In fact, there were whole lines of text that even though we used projected English subtitles for that inaugural performance in 1987, just to avoid unwanted howlers, we intentionally didn't translate. Nonetheless, this duet is hypnotically beautiful. It takes place in ancient Ceylon. The pearl divers, or pearl fishers of the title, are the tenor, Nadir, and Zurga, the baritone. They have had an estrangement in their friendship because they fell in love with the same veiled, beautiful priestess many years earlier, and yet they encounter one another anew. They reminisce about seeing that young lady for the first time and the magic of that encounter. They talk about how they had a falling out because of jealousy, and yet they return to the same hypnotic melody for the conclusion of the duet and say that they will remain friends forevermore. Now, speaking of operas with really bad libretti, we have two back-to-back excerpts from a piece that concert opera has performed twice. First in 1990 with the Korean soprano Sumi Jo and the tenor Chris Merritt, and then again in 2007 with the soprano Sarah Coburn and with Lawrence Brownlee. And that is Bellini's I Puritani, the Puritans, which dates to the year of Bellini's death in 1835, far too young at the age of 33. The first aria that we hear is kind of the obligatory jilted baritone aria in which he regrets the fact that the heroine of the opera, the soprano, is going to marry the tenor instead, Natch. It is called A per sempre io ti perdei, Ah, I have lost you forever. And it is a seamless legato piece, absolutely beautiful melody, and tricky. If you're a baritone and you can sing this flawlessly, then you can really sing. We're also going to hear the mad scene for the heroine Elvira, who has gone gaga because during the first act she thought that her beloved, Arturo, jilted her at the altar at the 11th hour. He actually didn't. He gallantly has saved Queen Henrietta of Scotland, who was imperiled during the first act, and will eventually return to her and all will end happily. But in the mad scene, Qui la voce sua soave, she talks about their lost love And then in the cabaletta, Vien di letto e in ciel la luna, come beloved, the moon is full. She kind of lunally and loopily talks about how he should come back to her. Rossini's Maometto II has had an interesting performance history. It met with only middling success at its premiere at the Teatro San Carlo in Naples in the early 19th century. And Rossini, always wanting to get an A, so to speak, took his own autograph score, and for the second production, which was scheduled for the Teatro La Fenice in Venice, made emendations and wholesale changes directly onto the autograph. So coming up with an autograph score that was authentic was sort of like removing all kinds of encrustations from an old master. It took the intrepid musicologist and Rossini scholar Philip Gossett to do this. He eventually did, but it's only within the last several years that the opera has had a true autograph score. Now, combine that with another factor. When Beverly Sills, Joan Sutherland, Marilyn Horne, Maria Callas were all exhuming these bel canto operas during the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc., it was a given that there would always be simplifications, transpositions, or just outright cuts in the parts for the tenors, baritones, or basses, because we used to say, quote unquote, male singers just can't do that the same way that sopranos and mezzos can, despite the evidence that if you look at the autograph scores of these operas as written by Rossini, male singers had every bit as much florid capability as sopranos and mezzos back in the day. Well, now that we have an autograph score, and now that we actually do have tenors, baritones, and basses that can sing circles around coloratura, Maometto actually did have an autograph score premiere at the Santa Fe Opera just within the last several seasons, and the same production was revived at Canadian Opera Company in Toronto. In the interim, if people wanted to perform this particular score more or less, what they usually resorted to were the adaptation in French that Rossini did of much of the same material called Le Siège de Corinthe, which takes the action out of the island of Negroponte during the Turkish occupation of 1470 and moves it to Greece and Corinth, or as Beverly Sills did, doing an Italian translation at both La Scala and the Met of the French version L'Assedio di Corinto, I hope your eyes didn't just glaze over. The plot of this opera involves Anna, a beautiful young lady who was the daughter of the ruler of the Isle of Negroponte, Eriso. She's intrigued by a stranger who, curiously enough, is going by the same alias as King James V in Rossini's opera La Donna del Lago, Uberto. He is actually the Sultan Mehmet II of Turkey, or Maometto II in Italian, in disguise canvassing the Isle for a hostile takeover, which, with his troops by sea, he does. When he does so, he abducts Anna and tells her he wants to marry her. She is appalled by his duplicity and by the fact that he's, causing a rampage in her native village, and so she refuses. Meanwhile, her father has sought refuge with another suitor, a young noble by the name of Calbo, in the tomb of Eriso's late wife, and he expresses some fear to Calbo that Anna will not be strong enough to fend off the advances of Maometto. Now, in a florid, long-form showpiece, a real bravura scene, so to speak, Calbo responds to this by singing "Non temer d'un abbasso affetto non fu mai capace quel core." Fear not, her heart has never been capable of such weakness. Now, this was actually one of the reasons, despite the fact that this is truly a wonderful piece that has octave leaps, it has coloratura, it has a kind of slow legato section followed by all kinds of coloratura fireworks, that the piece was initially not so popular with the Neapolitan audience, who found it to be too blocky, too long form for their particular tastes, since most of them had grown accustomed to Rossini working in much shorter style, and had kind of developed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder as an audience as a consequence. Nonetheless, it is a marvelous piece, one that while concert opera hasn't done it, they did do the opera that preceded this opera by 1 year, Rossini's Bianca e Faliero, which had as one of its stars the same mezzo that will perform it this evening, Vivica Genaux. So lift a glass and toast concert opera's 30th anniversary. I will certainly join you and will be happy in so doing. Salute!